Hey, welcome back to Total Nerd Talk Action. I reviewed the fan film of the Kenobi series. It's being dubbed the Patterson Cut, and I just want to give you my takes on it in a pros and cons format, and just give you my overall thoughts and whether or not I prefer this to the show. And I'll just get right on into it with you. Um, Starting with the pros, the first thing was the cutting out unneeded or drawn out scenes for the sake of pacing. Um, what instantly came to mind for me was uh, the Roken scene of Obi-Wan having to try to convince Roken to help him rescue Leia. In the series, he's adamant against it, and it took very little to change his mind. In fact, the thing that did change his mind was knowledge he already had and the feelings he already had. So it really wasn't much convincing. He just told a little bit of his story about his wife being a force user, and he's like, "Oh well, I guess I should do it then." And whereas, yeah, you have sympathy for the character, but it's not really necessary because the character doesn't need sympathy for the motivation. Like, I think the motivation, like, to just help the Jedi is just enough, but you really don't spend enough time with him to really care all that much. So I thought that was fine, just completely cutting that out for the sake of pacing and getting to the point. Leia's extensive running, it was cut. So when she was captured, it was there was no chase at all. It was completely cut. Just a bag over her head. Screen goes black, and that's it. Short and sweet. It was a good call. That was almost applause worthy. And then when her running from Obi-Wan on Dayu, that was edited, and I have kind of mixed feelings on that, and I'll tell you why when I get to the cons kind of side of it. But yeah, that chase, the too much chasing and running from Leia, and that was edited down, so I thought that was good. And much of the Tatooine stuff was cut out to tell for a more concise narrative focus, and which kind of goes into my next pro for this point is changing some of the scene orders, specifically towards the beginning with Nari, the Jedi that sought out Obi-Wan. Having the Inquisitors find Nari in the bar or cafe or whatever, that was after Nari's told to go back to town by Obi-Wan, after he already sought him out, which I think makes a ton more sense because at this point in the show, the Inquisitors already found him at the cafe, and then he sought out Obi-Wan, and then Obi-Wan told him to go back into town after they already knew he was there and identified him. Why would he go back into town? It just doesn't make sense. So I thought that was just horrible advice, especially to tell him to go back into town and not take his weapon with him. That is just the worst advice. So I thought rearranging those scenes gave it kind of more logic behind it, about the advice to go back to town and to leave him alone. And then this isn't changing the order of the scene, but just changing the scene completely was when they find him at the cafe, he doesn't escape. No, instead, Reva cuts him off, and he starts to talk. He's like, "It's no use. You'll never catch all of us." And then she just cuts his head off, and that was cool. Because as soon as he does it, it is a sudden scene change, and then when you come back to it later, when Obi-Wan comes to town, and he finds his body hanging, and it makes sense now to why it's wrapped around his torso instead of, because in my initial review or watch of it, I thought it would have been more effective to see him hanging by his neck, but I guess that would be too graphic for a family or kid audience. So at least this way, it makes sense why it's around his torso, and his head was cut out of the. It was edited out of the scene, so you see a headless Jedi just hanging in the town, and I thought that was brutal, and I thought that was cool. And kind of going off that, I think the thing that benefited the most from the changes was the use of Reva, because she goes all in on the rage. They don't try to redeem her at all in the Patterson cut, and it doesn't try to force sympathy for the character. In fact, I would argue that I was able to sympathize for her character more because they didn't try to tell all this backstory. And you know what? Moses Ingram did do a great job in the performance. I think it was just kind of the writing and of the character and like the character's logic, and especially I thought in the finale of the show when she asked, "What did I become him, or am I becoming just like him?" You can kind of see that, and I get that, but that trope of redemption is really played out, and I think the fact that she dies makes her more tragic because she dies like not being redeemed, and we do find out her origin. Like we still find it out that's not changed. We know her motivation is to kill Vader, and I think the fact that in this cut Vader actually kills her, she actually dies. And like, you know, I think it's a bold move not to let a character become redeemed, that like they die in the attempt, and like not heroically but selfishly, and she went out not putting up much of a fight at all because it's not edited any more than it was from the initial show. Vader owned her as he should have, and I think it makes it more believable, and Vader doesn't seem so inept at killing a youngling or someone who's a far more inferior warrior than he is. I don't understand why she would be able to survive as a Padawan, as a youngling, as a child, a lightsaber to any part of the torso from the Chosen One. And then she does it again as an adult, and Vader doesn't learn his lesson. I thought that was just terrible, And in this cut, it remedies that. So that was a big plus for me. Another big plus was there was some kind of added dialogue actually, and that helps kind of benefit the story and like motivations a little bit more. It explains the actions in the show, gives them logic. For instance, after Obi-Wan and Vader's first encounter, when Vader drags Obi-Wan through the fire, and then Obi-Wan manages to escape when the flames come back up, and was it Tala, I believe, sets the fire and sends the shipping droid to carry him off. And as opposed to the show where they don't explain why Vader does nothing, he already lowered the fire once, why can't he do it again? His suit is supposed to be fireproof. Why doesn't he walk through it? Why doesn't he force jump? Why don't he just go around the fire? No. But there's additional dialogue where they have a stormtrooper ask Vader if they should pursue. Vader pauses and they ask again, and he says no, not quite yet. So they never really explain why he wants to wait, but at least it's something. And again later on, with some more additional dialogue, is when they get into the actual fight, the final confrontation between Vader and Obi-Wan is buried by all the rubble, and he's having his flashbacks of Leia and Luke, and he actually gets some lines from Qui-Gon. Now, whether this is supposed to be him just hearing Qui-Gon's voice like in a memory, or if Qui-Gon's supposed to be talking to him, I think it could be interpreted either way, but I think the intention from the Patterson, from the person that recut it and added those lines in, because the lines were focus on the present and, may the force be with you. I think it very well could have been Qui-Gon talking to him in that moment. And then here's why I think that. Because once he bursts through like he does, and then he owns Vader, then when they have their conversation after he slices Vader's helmet, and Vader's telling him all these things, how he killed Anakin, not Obi-Wan. He's not Obi-Wan's failure. And in that moment, we hear Qui-Gon again telling Obi-Wan he is the chosen one. He will bring balance to the Force. And that's why he leaves, as opposed to just leaving without killing him. Because you remember in the show, when he's speaking to Qui-Gon, he says, one way or another, either he kills me or I kill him, this ends today. And then he has the upper hand, and he doesn't kill him. Again, they don't give you a definitive explanation on why he does that when he was set on killing him before. But at least this way, you kind of understand his motivation now. So it's, you don't have to come up with your own explanation. Oh, and let me tell you the best thing about this. When they have the fight between Obi-Wan and Vader, it's the use of Duel of the Fates. So you had that in their fight in episode 3, and it's back for this fight, and it kind of gives it that extra bit of emotion watching it, not only because of nostalgia and thinking back to their confrontation in episode 3, but just that music drives emotion so well, and that's something that the show was kind of lacking. There's a lack of music, a lack of a lot of the original music or prequel music, and there's music all throughout this fan cut, and it benefited very much. It was able to bring more emotion to the action, to what we're seeing on screen. And another thing about this fight, because at this point, since Reva was stabbed and left for dead by Vader, it doesn't cut away from Vader fighting Obi-Wan at all. It's all a constant fight between them. There's no chasing down Luke, and that was a big plus for me. So if you get more to the cons of it, I do have just a couple of things. Some of the jump cuts, though they were to improve the pacing of the story, it kind of sacrifices transition. For me, the best example of this is on Dayu, when they do the Leia chase scene on Dayu, when she's supposed to be running from Obi-Wan after they upload Obi-Wan's wanted hologram and everybody sees it. For no reason at all, you just see Leia run into some bounty hunters looking for Obi-Wan. So you do see the fact of his hologram, his wanted hologram, being uploaded for bounty, but you don't really understand why Leia is running. She's running for no reason, and then Obi-Wan comes from the other direction and kills the bounty hunters. And that's kind of some weird editing. And then all of a sudden they're on the roof, running on the roof. And I think that just kind of, it cuts in the middle of the action, and it kind of takes you out a little bit, but yeah, I think that's kind of my biggest thing was the fact that they try to improve the pacing. They have to work with the footage that they have in the show, and it just you couldn't make the transition as seamless as you'd kind of want it to be. And then the other kind of thing that was a little disappointing for me was there was some stuff that I did like in the show that was not in this cut. A couple smaller scenes that I liked were when Leia totally owns her cousin after he's being a jerk, and you can't, and it's kind of, I don't know, I think up to your interpretation on whether she's kind of tuning into the Force to kind of look into his mind a little bit, or if she's just that familiar with him to where she can just like break down his character so well of telling him, oh well, you don't really know the things you're saying, you don't know what they mean, you don't believe in them, it's just you're repeating what your father says and you're scared, you've never made a decision in your life. And I think it's cool because it makes her just, you see of just how strong minded she is, and it could be how observant or how strong-willed, and it was a scene that I thought was performed really well, and like, it was I was sad to see it go, but I understand it's not really needed. Another one was a scene I really liked that I wish would have still been in this cut was after Owen Lars tells Obi-Wan to stay away from Luke, and then Inquisitors show up, and Reva kind of gets in Owen's face, and he just doesn't bat an eye, he doesn't break, he just says like, nah, like, Jedi are vermin, I kill vermin on my farm. And I thought that Joel Edgerton just did such a great job in that scene, and I thought like taking that out was a shame, but I understand that scene would be cut for better, not only better pacing but storytelling as well, because of how they recut the order of the Inquisitors hunting Nari. It may not have been it might not have made sense to leave it in that regard. So, but I was still sorry to see it go. And then another small scene was later on when the stormtrooper caught him slipping up and calling Leia by her real name when they were under the guise of father and daughter. And he's like, you said her name was Leia. And like, what that did was it added some suspense, some drama to the scene, and Obi-Wan had to think on his feet, improvise. But again, it really had no impact on the bigger story, so there was no real reason to keep it in, I suppose, other than like, oh shit, is it about to go down? And no, I didn't go down right there, so I guess there was no real reason to keep it in. But I would say the scene that I really wish they hadn't taken out was the Order 66 scene at the very beginning of the show, where it starts with the Padawans training with the Jedi, and then the clone troopers coming in, and the Jedi having to fend them off. This scene could have been saved, could have been salvaged, because you still have the conversation between Reva and Obi-Wan, where he learns who she is, and she has the flashback of Anakin killing the Padawans. In this instance, you could have started the flashback with that whole Order 66 scene, with after the Jedi Masters are struck down and the kids are like, what do we do now? We run. And that from there you can cut right into Anakin coming in and cutting down the Padawans. I thought that you could have kept that scene in, you could have made it work, because it was such a shame to see it go, because because that was probably my favorite scene in the very first episode. Was the very first scene of the episode, so it really sucked for me for it to be taken out completely. Seeing the Jedi, like, you know, from a wide view, seeing the Jedi fighting all the not stormtroopers, clone troopers. So I wish that would have stayed in. But those are the only real issues that I had with this cut. So I guess my final thoughts was, overall I did like it. But I actually like the show too. I like them both. I like the show and I liked the Patterson cut, the fan cut. Now with the show, you get more time with Kenobi, which is always a plus for me. He's one of my favorite characters. But you also get a lot of nonsense. And with the fan cut, you get all the main story beats. You get improving on many scenes, especially what would be the finale. But you get kind of a slightly choppy editing to remove the fluff and parts of Reva's story I didn't like. But that's kind of like, the trade. Like there was no perfect trade-off. So now if you ask me, well, if I had to pick one for my head canon, that's going to depend on what they put out later, like, because Reva in actual continuity is still alive. So is she going to show up in Andor? I don't know. We have to wait and see. But if you ask me what's my head canon with just everything that's out right now without knowing the future, I'd probably say I would prefer the fan cut, actually. But that being said, I do like both. Check out Kenobi on the Disney Plus, and then check out the fan cut. I'll leave a link in the description below where you can see it. And yeah, so I know I said that in my last video I was going to do a video exploring what I would want to see if they continued the Kenobi series. So I'm still going to do that. I just haven't been able to because of my schedule and time constraints. But I'm going to get to that soon. So until then, like, share the video, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.